and welcome to this week's episode of Automated, where some of us have been told recently to try to keep their voice more even throughout the entire podcast. I am, of course, the most even and fairly handed of all, Stefan Ilia, your host and CEO and co-founder of Polymath Robotics. Across from me is Paul Atreides, or so I can read from his shirt. Sir, is this even enough voicing for you?
Yeah, could be better.
I'll have you know, dear listener, he also moved the microphone to be about 14 feet away from me, all at the behest of our sound engineer, who, I don't know, I'm very angry with.
I think our sound engineer has run out of polite ways to say, stop being so loud, Stefan.
Him and everyone else in my life. This, of course, is Automated, our weekly podcast where we talk about robots that we haven't recorded in at least 3 weeks, maybe 6, maybe 100. We do this podcast in 2 parts.
Time has no meaning in HQ.
We do this podcast in 2 parts, where first we invent a superficially silly robot using a quick little web app that we threw together that will randomly pick a technology and a market. And then we'll talk about something going on in robots. Ilia, anything interesting happened in robots recently?
Well, 2 things. A real thing is MINEXPO happened a few weeks ago, and that was pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. And then a slightly less real thing happened, which is the usual hype cycle of Tesla things is now going again. So,
I mean, I think specifically what we want to talk about in that part is Tesla had kind of a blatantly fake set of demos. So interesting to talk about, like, fake robot demos. Like, we've touched on the subject before, but I think it's an interesting one to dig into. But first, let's play a game. All right, so let me use this handy dandy little autonomous vehicle sentence generator. See, too many of these technologies are like general software technologies and not robot specific.
You got to add to them. Listeners, send in your recommendations specifically to make Stefan upset.
Yeah, like AI for firefighting quickly looks like just normal AI stuff and not a robot.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
You want to build an AI firefighting robot?
Sure. I mean, I think when I think about a robot to fight fires, there's a number of folks doing stuff in the space. There's a cool company called BurnBot that's pre-burning areas so that fires can't get to them. A company called Kodama who does force thinning to take fuel away from fires. But really, I want to fight fires. I want to make an active fire dead.
Well, I was going to say, I was imagining it's more as like robotic firefighter, like for houses.
I think it's called a sprinkler.
No, come on. If that was the case, the fire department would not exist if sprinklers just solved all problems.
I thought this was Fair and Fight 451, and the fire department does a different job now.
Yeah, I know, because if there's one group of people who people don't like and disrespect and should be replaced, it's firefighters.
Well, so you're thinking in home.
Or apartment or
maybe
business
like a
complex.
turret in your ceiling that like will aim a hose at fire to put it out.
Stefan, you're never going to get the VC dollars with a turret. This has to be a humanoid that breaks down the door, rushes in, makes the ethical decision to save the child over the grandma because the child is only 30% burnt and has a brighter future. All of this in unsupervised learning. So what we're going to do to data collect is we're going to just send the robot into random fires and see what it does. And there you go. $1 billion of funding, please.
Well, so like the part of this that I'm most interested in, and you know, I don't know how non-deterministic this is or not, but I wonder how rules-based where you should point a nozzle is at a fire. Because
no idea.
Let's say,
good question.
Let's say there is a 2-dimensional fire 5 feet in front of you, just to go off of what you can see.
Yeah.
And there might be, to talk about it like a mountain range, there might be 6 peaks. One peak might be 10 times higher than the rest of them. Do you shoot the base below the highest peak? Do you shoot the base near the place where it's spreading so as to limit so that it can burn out the highest peak? Do you not actually shoot the base and let water fall down to cool the whole thing down? I think there's different versions of how you spray. I think there's different configurations of how you point the hose to have different like spray profiles.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to be aware of backblast and that kind of stuff.
So like, sure,
we have actually a fairly complicated problem.
Like, sure, we have a humanoid. And I think better than that, the humanoid gets to your house as a fast-moving dog robot. just gallops down the street.
Right.
Somersaults through the door, doesn't open it.
Through the sewer pipes.
Has a hose that comes out one end and plugs into your tap or rips your plumbing apart to hijack it and connect. Fine. No worries. We'll solve that in the first 3 months. What I'm really interested in is, where do you aim the hose?
Yeah, exactly. And I think not only that, you mentioned just the fire itself, but then there's structural considerations. Like, do you put out the grandma's curtains that are on fire, or do you put out the tank of propane gas that's on fire?
The curtains are heirloom.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean,
you could use AI to assess value to different sections of the house.
I don't even think it's value. I think it's just imminent danger.
Yeah.
Like, as a human, you'd try to put out the propane tank because that could explode.
Yeah.
And
if the tanks can look in all sorts of different dimensions.
Yeah. And if
I just bought functionally a propane tank that looks like a pile of stone because it's going to be in a little fire pit in my backyard that looks like a pile of stone. So without knowing that fire pit has a propane tank inside, you might not know.
I mean, I'm sure the firefighters love you. But no, because the other problem here is, by the time the fire is serious enough that you've called the fire department, like, you're probably not actually trying to salvage anything. You're probably trying to save lives and prevent the thing from spreading.
I feel like in San Francisco, at least, the fire department comes pretty early. They come when there's a homeless person doing weird stuff on the street. They come when there's an actual fire. They come when the building's burning down. They come like at all parts of the section.
No, for sure. But I meant like in the actual fire, like putting on gear, bringing out the big hose, spraying water. Like, when it's that serious, I'm betting their responsibility is not to save property. Their responsibility is to protect people and prevent the fire from spreading.
Yes, but stop the fire from spreading so as to save property.
Yeah, sure.
Ilia is having a very cynical day today. I'll have you know.
No, the opposite. Firefighters are the last true bastion of like goodness. Their straight purpose is to save lives and nothing else. Everything else comes secondary. In this situation, I'm talking about, like, if there's a raging fire, priority one is saving people.
Well, you can
Everything else comes
if you're
secondary.
an evil business capitalist, like some people on this side of the table, you could view them as a public insurance policy to protect the ownership class of a city, so as to minimize damages and protect the long-standing property base.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very unreasonable to do any sort of socialized protection of people's health.
That's why we need to have private fire insurance.
Yeah, that's right.
But going back to the matter at hand, I mean, we could. I heard from a VC the other week that part of why some companies, some AI foundation model for robot companies have raised so much money is they need so much money for data collection. So probably for a firefighting robot, we need a couple $100 million to buy a series of buildings and start fires in them. And try to have the robot set them out to do, data collection.
I think there's a simple optimization here: is you send the robot to appear at your door of random business.
Somersault through the door.
No. Just, knock politely and say, "Nice door you got here." Be a shame if it burned to the ground.
And then set fire to it.
Immediately. By complete coincidence, the giant lithium battery in your backpack that gives you 5 minutes of runtime catches fire at that very moment.
That actually is an interesting point. Could we... So a robot's going to need to fight fires for more than 5 minutes and more than 30 minutes in all reality. So we'd probably need to plug it in.
Well, yeah, you need to plug it in. But you're already dragging a hose.
Yeah.
Putting a high voltage line on the hose is not that difficult.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is we run power through, we make the water conductive.
You still need ground. Yeah. Current is a loop, my man.
I just like the idea of the robot busts into your house, rips your pipes apart at your sink, plugs in a hose, runs a live wire into your pipes, and takes power out the other side.
Just causes more fire while it goes.
Yeah.
Awful idea. But no, I mean, you could just run power around the cable pretty reasonably.
Yeah.
And not have to worry about overheating your batteries.
However, I assume that one of the actually probably standard operating procedure for firefighter is while one set of guys is going to spray the hoses, another set of guys is turning off the power, probably to the block.
Probably, yeah. Again, I have no idea how these things are true, but that makes sense.
Probably is
makes sense.
instead of both of us use hose,
Yeah.
I go turn off the power, you spray everything.
Yeah.
Because spraying everything while power is still running might also cause more fires.
I mean, the other benefit here actually is in the DARPA Humanoid Challenge, one of the teams, I'm forgetting which one, I think Cased, managed to get a better power to weight ratio just by water cooling their motors.
Mm-hmm.
Because brushless DC motors, you can actually run them underwater. They have no spark gaps, right?
Yeah.
They're entirely inductive in the cable. So if the cables are enameled and waterproof, you can run them in water. There's no problem. And so the only problem is when you run them over power, they heat and they melt. So if you water cool them, that problem goes away too.
So you could have the whole robot basically be a big balloon.
It's not a balloon. You'd use part of the output of this giant fire hose to actively cool the robot.
Yeah.
And the thing could have, I don't know, 3x power density.
I wonder if warm water is better at fighting fires than cold water.
Probably negligible. Yeah. With the amount of water flowing here, you'd be raising it by like a degree.
Yeah.
You're not gonna. Yeah.
But going back to the AI problem and wrapping it up.
Yeah.
Neither of us know enough about how fire works to know if there is a deterministic method to best fight fire.
I'm sure there's. I'm sure a giant chunk of the training is what to do in different.
But on the other hand, I wouldn't be. Yes, sorry, but a giant chunk of the training does not actually mean a giant chunk of what's true. Like similar to how it is exceedingly complicated, exceedingly difficult to simulate weather and wind. It also might be exceedingly difficult to simulate fire.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
So you might need especially fire coming out of an unknown environment with unknown levels of flammability and propane tanks hidden in fake stone columns and whatever. It actually might there's a world where fire is an open problem that AI is actually better to solve.
Yeah, I think again you're going to come back to the data issue.
So in other words, for those of you listening, mail us $500 million, no less. We will buy a bunch of buildings, burn them down, and collect data. And
fire insurance.
Did that mess up my even voice, do you think?
Probably. Yeah.
Data is the new oil.
No. You know, the paradigm is oil is the new data.
Editor, you shouldn't cut that out. Oil is the new data.
Yeah. For our firefighting robot.
So 2 weeks ago, we went to MINEXPO, which is a once every 2 years, every 4 years conference on mining with lots and lots of equipment and surprisingly, lots of robots. There are more companies than I could really count that had some version of an AGV, a large vehicle that's been partially drive-by-wire remote controlled. There's multiple large public companies doing live robot demos. In many ways, actually, MINEXPO was a better robotics event than CES.
Yeah, easily.
And I haven't been to TechCrunch Disrupt, but probably. There was more real robots there than kind of anywhere else that we've seen.
Yeah, exactly. Deployed in the kind of nitty-gritty situations.
And we were getting good questions from folks.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much more of this segment to just be talking about how cool of an event MINEXPO was, or if there are specific insights.
I think, the standard trade show rules for robot supply, networking is painful, always. Yep. Running live demos is always risky.
Yep.
And a lot of companies were pretty cautious, I'd say, in the kind of live demos that they were running. But yeah, no, I think, on a personal note for Polymath, it was pretty interesting to see. I think this is the first time that we went to a trade show that not only we had people come out who had sought us out just to kind of come and chat with us, but then they would go away and bring their potential clients to come and chat with us.
Yeah.
And kind of this growing kind of, I don't know, maybe 30% of the people who were visiting were folks we had never heard of.
It helped that we were sitting in a random corner, so there's no accidental walking by us.
Yeah, there's no random folks. It was like,
but it still was kind of a better trade show than we had any right to.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, I think part of what this comes to is this is a market that has functionally been able to buy autonomy for 20 years, and they still can't buy enough.
Yeah.
There's still use cases that they've never gotten to automate. There's still big labor challenges there's no way to solve. They've been through everything from the vertical full stack solutions like Caterpillar and Komatsu offer. They've been through, can we build it ourselves because we're a many-figure billion-dollar company, and why can't we just build this ourselves? It's a unique market in that, like, the magic of robotics is far gone, and the practical implications of, like, no, how do you do this in this? Yes, I know exactly what a cost map is. At what rate will you update your cost map, and how can I transfer information from one of your vehicle? How can I transfer cost map information from one vehicle to another in doing a similar job 45 feet away?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I noticed was the industry is waking up to vendor lock more than I've seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
There was a pretty strong trend of companies saying we have an open standard. Here it is.
Yeah.
Go look it up. Use
Yep.
whatever you want.
Yep.
And that's very good to see as well.
Yep.
I think that's a sign of the market maturing a little bit.
Frankly, like, they're unhappy by what they've been able to get.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of solutions, and it's like to throw an example out of this, like one that I usually just give to people in mining. But like, let's say there's a work face, which is, where you're getting the material out of the ground. And let's say there's a processor. There might be a fast but fuel inefficient path from work face to processor. There might be a slow but fuel efficient path from work face to processor. Really any mining company, but ideally one using autonomous vehicles, should be able to alter the flow of material based on the prevailing price of their ore that day and the prevailing price of fuel. On a fuel expensive day and a cheap day for nickel, you should send every vehicle on the fuel efficient slow path, and you should switch that around as conditions change. And basically that is a feature that I've seen multiple bigwigs at billion-dollar companies open their eyes to and think, wow, really? You think that could happen one day? And to a third of the people listening to this podcast, that's a hackathon project that could exist in a day or two.
Yeah, the problem is when your site has one vehicle that can do this and 99 from different manufacturers that can't.
Or when you have vertically integrated autonomy software, and they're not interested in adding that feature to their roadmap.
Yeah, that's the thing. Because even assuming an absolutely outstanding manufacturer, that manufacturer is going to be outstanding in their particular type of vehicle. Their trucks, for example. Yeah. And they might have an excavator.
Or even if they build lots of different types of vehicles.
Yeah.
They won't. There is no mine that only uses Deere equipment or Caterpillar equipment.
Exactly. Yeah. It's imagine you had to go through life to only buy equipment from General Electric. Yeah. Everything you buy, your cell phones, your laptops, honestly, had to come from General Electric.
Screw that. Apple.
Yeah, or Apple.
And
great.
I have a lot of Apple stuff. My thermostat is not from Apple.
Yeah.
My smart lock is not from Apple. My car, not from Apple.
Yeah, even though they tried.
Even when I had a lot of Samsung stuff, did not have a Samsung car. I've seen them. They exist. I did not use Samsung for insurance, even though it's their biggest business unit.
Yeah. Side note, I think Apple officially kiboshed their autonomous car project recently by shutting down their permitting process for it. So it's dead. Yeah.
But I mean, I think like going back to MINEXPO as a transition point, there's plenty of stuff where there's a high level of scrutiny for demos, because in this market and in many other markets for robotics, they've seen demos before that didn't turn into reality very much.
Yeah.
Which I think brings us on to our second topic, which is the Tesla humanoid robotics demo the other week,
and the robotaxi. To be fair,
I think that can be rolled into this, but the humanoid is more egregious.
Yeah.
So for those of you unaware, Tesla did a big event last week where this event was supposed to show off their robotaxi, and they also did a lot of stuff with humanoids. And by a lot of stuff with humanoids, I mean there was humanoids walking out from behind the mist. There was humanoids making people drinks. There's humanoids interacting with people at the event while the robotaxis drove around. Blah 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 blah. As a meaningful theme change from previous Tesla events, basically immediately the world called bullshit. Almost I think the same day.
Yeah.
People were saying that looks teleoperated, and insiders were saying, well, yes, of course it is. Or that Tesla humanoid bartender looks a lot like a person in a suit. Oh, yes, of course it is.
Yeah.
And I think this falls into an interesting broader thread. Like in a number of robotaxi companies before, not including Tesla, you'd see really cool robotaxi demos and then learn years later that, there was a person, or there was self-driving truck demos where the picture had no one sitting behind the wheel, but there was actually a person sitting in the back of the cab. There's been robotaxi demos where you sort of learned later that there was never a robotaxi driving without a teleoperator paying active attention. So I guess Ilia, what I'd love to talk about is fake demos. Like, A, why do people do them? B, why do they work? Or how to make them not work? And C, like, what's it kind of mean for all of us?
I would sort of classify them in 3 categories if I could.
Okay.
So the first one and the most benign is, here's a demo of what could be.
Okay.
And everybody who's watching the demo is aware that this is a representative sample of a vision of the future with parts and pieces kind of roughed in. That's like the ideal case, right?
Okay.
Right?
The ideal fake demo is everyone knows it's fake.
Everyone knows it's fake, but it's a visual aid to help you understand what they're talking about.
Yep.
And the fakery is around the pieces that are not actually core to your product. So,
and I think that's an important. So my autonomous car, if everyone thinks it's only supposed to be autonomous, it does not qualify for this if it's teleoperated.
Yeah, exactly. So like if the core thing I'm trying to show is autonomy of a vehicle, then showing like, oh, here's a street scene and here's some controlled settings where people are walking carefully and like it's not an open public place and I want to show the vision of what this future could look like. I find that's okay because you see it's a controlled environment. You sort of understand like this isn't, unless the person stands up and says, I'm shipping this next week. Like there's sort of understanding.
I feel like most of the audiences for these sorts of demos don't read that fine print.
Okay, so 3 classes, right?
Yeah.
Let me finish, all right? That one to me is forgivable, right?
Okay.
Part 2 is when you've made roads, you've made progress on the tech development, you now have it ready, but it's not ready enough, and you have to paper over that fact. That's starting to get less forgivable.
Okay. And my humanoid is supposed to be able to 10 bar, but it like actually keeps on spilling ice everywhere, so we're just going to send a guy in a suit.
Well, I think that was just teleoperated. I don't think it was a guy in the suit. We can talk about it later. We can double check. I suspect it was just teleoperated. So
I'm fact checking live. Don't worry. Don't worry, dear listener.
Do it.
The lies will be exposed.
Now we're getting into like pretty morally gray territory. The third one is when you're intentionally trying to deceive people. And that one really upsets, I think, everyone. And I think that we're starting to slide into that territory with some of these robotics demos, where they're trying to make the case that this is a robot that's ready for, what did they claim? Babysitting and walking your dog and bartending. And even the general public, who's not an expert in robotics, knows that this is not feasible anytime soon. What is your fact check bringing up?
The subject line agrees with me.
Okay.
But I'm reading the text while you talk.
All right. So I think in those 3 classes, and I think the thing that's interesting for a robotics company, it's very tempting to blur the lines between the first class of visions and the second class of kind of papering over limitations. But you always end up paying for it down the road because something that you envisioned does not actually work out the way that you thought it would. And that causes delays, that causes lots and lots of problems.
I mean, I also think it causes a fundamental... I think part of why funding for the robotics market is so rough right now is there's become a fundamental mistrust of any claim by anyone working in robots. And that mistrust has come because, without accusing any individual actor of fraud, people now assume that no demo is real.
Yeah, I mean, we've had too many years of promise of full self-driving cars from multiple actors and full self-driving trucks and full self-driving whatever. And they're just not materializing. And I think that's similar to what we're seeing in a lot of these cutting edge places. And again, I think from the engineering side, it usually comes from a good place of trying to show a vision of the future, to try to show some guidance and get some early feedback without building the whole system. Because realistically, if you're running a company, you're not funded by Google, for example.
Yeah.
You have a limited budget.
Yeah.
And so building a whole product that then flops because it's fundamentally not what anybody wants is expensive and stupid.
Yeah.
And so building most of a product or a vision, getting the feedback as early as you can, is a good idea. But you start to, the more you go towards level 3 of that fakeness, the more towards the dark side you're turning.
So the what I'm skimming while trying to have an active conversation, be an interesting podcast co-host while reading, is the Tesla humanoids were not physically people in suits that looked like Tesla humanoids. However, they were being teleoperated through bodysuits.
Through rigs. Yeah, motion capture rigs. Yeah, that makes sense.
Which in some ways feels less offensive than a costume, like at that Chinese event the other month.
Yeah.
But more offensive than joysticks.
Yeah, I mean,
right? Because
I've run teleoperation for the PR2, for example, and it was a decade ago.
Yeah.
So it was quite a lot more crude.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, at some point when you're replicating human joints, it's a very straightforward process. That's something that could have comfortably been done in the 60s and probably was by Disney.
I mean, honestly, like I just kind of think of like the motion capture suits for Star Wars Episode 1.
Star Wars, yeah, exactly.
And like, it's one thing if there's a joystick that can abstract out all the movements of an arm I move a single joystick in a direction and the robot figures out what all joints need to move. It's a very different thing if literally it's just doing its best approximation of what I'm doing.
Yeah. I mean, if you're literally copying the joint positions of a human and the human's doing all the processing, you've at best made a fancy remote control.
Yeah.
Which again, I'm sure Disney was doing with animatronics 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And Disney's not short on cash. And if it had been possible to make the leap from fancy remote control to full autonomy, I am 100% certain they would have done it.
And I think we've postulated interesting ideas for how that could be useful products on this show. I think in one episode we talked about using humanoid robots in space to do maintenance if you don't want to send the people out in the spacesuit.
Yeah, I mean, the actual International Space Station uses a version of that.
Yeah.
The control panel for the Canadarm and for the Dexter machine at the end of it is not a motion capture suit, but it is quite high degree of freedom kind of control for the end effector.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess my question is like, when does this become actual like securities fraud? Because if I sell you land that has a house on it in New Mexico, and I'm Glengarry, and I work for a firm waiting for leads from Glengarry Glen Ross, and it turns out that you buy the land for $20,000 and you think there's a house there and it's a development, and you drive out and it's just a patch of desert. That is obviously fraud. If I sell shares in a company and on the public market I say, we have this land development in New Mexico and it has all these houses and it's so beautiful, and I say that and I'm a publicly traded company, that is securities fraud. If people think that we're building something that we're not, Theranos, as our producer said off in the corner, if I'm saying that this machine can say if you have diabetes or not from a single drop of blood, that has been found to be securities fraud.
Yeah,
What point is...
Again, the reason she went to prison was that.
Yeah.
Not the medical issues, interestingly enough.
Like, at what point is, hey, I'm a robotics company. Here's our demo. It totally works. Look how great our tech is. And on the back end, it's not what I represented it as.
I mean, speaking soberly, right? I think the two things are, where does marketing cross over into fraud?
It's just a legal question that is not we're not poised to answer on this podcast.
No, absolutely. But more, I mean, like, if I'm a company like we are, for example, that's privately held, that is not going to get a stock bump for making an announcement and is not trying to build a thing that is pre-selling something that we have like no hope of building. That's a different question than if you directly benefit from the outcome of this lie.
I mean, I think even if we're a private company, I mean, Theranos was a private company, was it not? Like, Theranos, raised money from investors on claims it could not make.
Fair.
And things that they knew to not be true.
Yeah, you're right. So so like, are we...
So if you're a founder showing a robot that fundamentally does not work the way that you are portraying it to.
Yeah. And again, I want to call out, we've been skeptical of humanoids and of LLMs and stuff like that, but all of that is feasible and doable, right? I'm
not talking about can humanoids ever work? Can LLMs ever do something valuable?
Yeah, exactly. It's not that. It's like, I am actively making a entire press event for something that is even to a, idiot in a hurry test for trademark law and IP law. obviously not functional.
Yeah.
Like that seems to blur the line a little bit.
Yeah. So, but it seems to blur the line, but almost everyone does it.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why investors have gotten wary about this entire market, is that there's been so many companies that have made such outlandish claims, and the outlandish claims almost always sell better than the landish claims.
Yeah.
So disproportionate dollars have gone to efforts that have not operated as promised.
Yeah, and again, it's a short-term gain, long-term pain problem, right?
Yeah.
You know, this particular company might get some money, but if they can't deliver on their exceptionally unlikely claim, then they're causing problems for everybody else.
Another thing I heard when I was talking to that VC the other week about a recent robotics investment is the person that they had doing technical due diligence on that investment was like a robotics undergrad who had gone right to a VC firm and like
nice
had no real
awesome
capability of understanding
oh no
what gaps were where.
Oh, that's rough.
And I mean, I think the reality here is robots are such complicated systems of systems. There's been such a proliferation of bad acting among robot demos. And the people doing due diligence against these claims are so often willing to suspend their disbelief and, frankly, technically unable to question claims that they hear. That, you know, it's just kind of been a perfect firestorm for bad acting.
I wonder if there's another market comparable to this. I'm trying to think of it live. Like
in medicine, there's peer-reviewed studies.
Yeah.
Crypto.
Yep. Crypto's another good one.
Yep.
Right? Like that was a whole...
And I think a lot of crypto companies made big claims as to user bases by being clever about how they call a user. I think actually part of what's helped B2B SaaS so much and consumer web apps is there's now third-party data on how many times someone pings your website.
Yeah.
In fact, there's VC firms who look at the Series B and beyond level where they don't care about your vision pitch. They literally know your web traffic before the meeting and like, your consumer app has 20 million visits a day. You must have something going on here.
Exactly.
And that doesn't exist for this sort of deep tech. It's just fundamentally a different type of investment.
Yeah, I think crypto is a good example where it was too complex for the average person to easily understand. I don't understand it for sure. And like...
Well, you understand the normal stuff. You don't understand the more exotic, more complicated, and therefore more likely to be filled with fraud stuff.
Right. And whenever you have a complicated financial tool or product that potentially is worth a lot or potentially worth zero.
It works out great.
Every time. 5% of the time, it works every time.
And with that being said, outside of doing lots and lots of fake demos, what are we going to talk about next week?
Don't know. We'll be at Robo Business tomorrow, which will be a few days ago by the time this
Ilia
podcast
will be
goes out.
talking at Robo Business this week. For the multiple people who have strangely reached out to us asking for free tickets to Robo Business, I don't even know if that's a thing that exists, so I didn't look into it.
Yeah, why?
I still don't know why people reached out for free tickets to a $150 event, but
okay.
It must be to see you, I think.
Doubt.
No one ever asks for free tickets at things I speak at.
They know you're too capitalist for it.
They can hear you from outside the event.
If folks didn't hear it from that, Nicole from stage left said they know they can hear Stefan from outside the event.
And with that, we'll see you next time.
See you next time.